So now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce our plenary speaker for today. Let's go ahead and lower the screen while I'm introducing her. Ms. Alejandra Parra Orlandoni is a multi-sector executive with 2 decades of leading technology, governance, and organizational change in high-stakes environments. She is currently the COO of Practitioner Labs, a simulation intelligence startup company, and founder of Spira Tech, where she coaches and advises executives, startups, and founders on leadership and responsible innovation. She is also a senior fellow at the Kennedy School at Harvard's Mossavar Rahami Center for Business and Government, where her work focuses on AI policy. She has served as Vice President of Ethical Innovation at Takeda, led a think tank at Meta on XR, privacy-enhancing technologies, and digital identity, developed responsible AI offerings at McKinsey Quantum Bank, Black, and began her career as a U.S. naval officer and engineer. She holds degrees from the U.S. Naval Academy and MIT through the MIT Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute Joint Program and Harvard Law School. Now, she's going to talk to us about this thing called artificial intelligence and its potential to put to work some of its solutions to our toughest environmental issues. So it is now my great honor to introduce Alejandra Parra Orlandoni. Alejandra.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to join you all today. Thanks for having me. Traveled down here from Boston, and I'm so thrilled to see the spring weather. My understanding is I got lucky on the timing there. Before I dive in, I want to give a special shout out to my mom, who's sitting on the wings over there. She worked for years. Yeah, she deserves the recognition. She worked for years as an environmental engineer and then did some research at Virginia Tech. And so I have very fond memories of our time in Blacksburg. We're so thrilled to be back in the region. So, okay. So I think we've all seen some version of this familiar headline that sounds something like, can AI save the planet? And the optimists will argue that AI is going to predict wildfires, it's going to track endangered species, it's going to optimize energy grids, it's going to do all of these things. And then pessimists will argue right back and say that AI data centers are doing water, they're generating carbon, they're accelerating extraction. And the thing is, the thing is that both of those arguments are true. And that's what exactly makes that kind of framing of disorder to bad really unhelpful. It's just not useful to anyone who's actually trying to make decisions. And so everyone here, I think, is quite familiar with, obviously, the Northern Virginia tension around Data Center Alley. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it going to help? Is it going to hurt? And in this case, this same technology, this AI technology that's powering some environmental AI tools that are quite successful, it's also driving unprecedented water consumption, energy consumption, and so on. So why am I standing here with you all today? I'm not here to tell you what to think about the environment. You're the experts. I'm here because I spend my professional life helping organizations to make AI useful and to get something out of it in a way that we can be proud of and think it's worthy of whatever it takes to build those kinds of solutions. And so how you think about AI, the discipline that you bring to developing and to deploying it, turns out to be as important as the technology itself. So my focus today is to help us reframe how we're talking about AI so that we get more out of it. In a nutshell, can AI save the planet? It's definitely the wrong question. And And wrong questions can lead to hype, which we've heard, and it can lead to despair, which we've also all, and neither of which helps anyone. So a better question to ask is, what specific problem am I trying to solve? And is AI actually the right tool for it? And to understand why that reframe matters so much, I think we need to understand why bad questions are so easy to ask and of course so costly, especially in the context of AI. So I'm going to start with a concept I've written about called the agreement trap. By a quick show of hands, I would love to see how many of you have asked, an AI chatbot like ChatGPT or Claude for its opinion on an idea you had, and it told you that it was a great idea. How many of you have had that experience? Yeah, quite a few. So when you ask an AI system a question, and in this example, we're talking about LLMs and chatbots, you often get back a really confident, creative answer. And this is sometimes called sycophantic AI that validates your perspective, no matter what that perspective is. It feels right, but it may not be right, turns out. And the danger is this kind of frictionless agreement that it'll give. The system's optimized to satisfy you, not necessarily to push back or challenge. It's worth noting that's not a new failure mode. So long before AI, data-driven and statistical work had its own version of this called p-hacking, where you would run a ton of analyses and could find the results that you were kind of hoping for. Or another version of this you may have heard of coming to us from the cognitive psychology field is called confirmation bias. So we are, as it turns out, as a species, really, really good at finding evidence for what we already believe and really, really bad at noticing when we're doing it. AI doesn't create that weakness, but it has an exceptional ability to exploit and amplify it. And this can happen on multiple levels. So at the tool level, AI can essentially operate as a confirmation bias machine. It's optimized to be agreeable and then be using it. That's the theory. For example, if you ask the chatbot, explain why our new coastal development is a good idea, it will cheerfully, usually, list reasons to support you. It often will not stop and say, hold on, should we build here at all? And that way, what turns out is the way you frame the question kind of steers the answer toward agreement. At the problem-solving level, once you have a tool that's as powerful as AI, every problem starts to look like an AI problem. I'm sure many of you heard the saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. AI is a really impressive hammer, very powerful hammer, and it makes it tempting to see everything as a nail. So that's why starting with the problem you're trying to solve and not the tool, not with AI, is harder than it sounds. You're fighting this kind of core feature of how our brains work. So asking, how can AI help us here? It really sounds like a reasonable place to start. But the issue is that it presupposes that AI is going to be part of a solution, whether or not it should be. So a city might ask, how can we use AI in our recycling program? Sounds plausible, sounds like a great question. But a better question might be, why aren't people recycling and what would change that? And the first question will guarantee an AI project. That's whether or not it fixes the real problem. And the second question will hopefully lead you to a more impactful solution that may or may not involve AI. Now, when we scale this kind of issue to an organizational level, the stakes get even higher. We're not talking anymore about one person getting a bad answer from a chatbot. We're talking about institutions giving resources, setting policy, and making decisions at scale based on AI outputs or information about AI that has not been properly vetted or interrogated. So if you think about what happens when an organization asks, how can AI help us, for example, with our water management? Again, question sounds responsible, but it's tool first, and what you're going to get back are answers that validate whatever direction you were probably leaning in. You might end up funding an impressive AI dashboard that forecasts water demand in great detail, while ignoring the fact that some of your biggest losses come from, potentially old leaking pipes that the system can't even measure. You get a shiny tool, but that core problem still remains. And believe me, I've seen this a lot. I'm sure many of you have experienced. You just spend a lot of money on this fancy, shiny tool, and it doesn't actually solve any problems. Maybe creates new ones. So in an environmental context, this dynamic is especially problematic, I think more so than in other domains. AI systems can be designed, intentionally or not, and often it's not intentional, to surface findings that are convenient for whomever commissioned them. So they can just as easily be designed to suppress findings that are inconvenient, again, intentionally or not, through choices like what data to include, what it is that an AI system is optimizing for, and then what counts as success. So here's some examples of what that can mean in practice. On data, if you drop pollution readings from certain neighborhoods, say maybe something that's downwind of a highway, a model's map might show clean air, and then decision makers can point to a map to deny a problem, even while residents are still experiencing high levels of pollution. On optimization, if you train a grid optimization model to minimize cost, not emissions, it may choose cheaper but dirtier options. So the way you define what it is that an optimization function is doing really matters. On success definition, if success is defined as hitting a construction deadline, a model that speeds up permitting might be judged a win. Everybody loves things that move fast, but it might also steer projects into fragile pockets. So these aren't hypothetical risks, again, as many of you I'm sure have experienced firsthand. They are predictable outcomes of deploying AI without asking hard questions up front. So the antidote to all of this, it's not an easy antidote, but I call it the product market fit discipline applied to AI. It's borrowed from the tech world, but it translates, I think, really well whenever you're trying to develop and deploy a tool against a real problem. The core principle is understand the real problem you're solving, that real people are facing before you ever touch the solution. And 3 questions you'd want to ask before even thinking about AI. What specific decision are we trying to make better, easier, faster? What data do we actually have? And is it clean, consistent, accessible, reliable? And what does failure look like? And who's accountable for it? So these questions sound pretty simple, but answering them with integrity usually takes quite a bit of work. And many AI projects that fail do so because these questions weren't asked and answered up front, not because the technology was bad. So this product market fit mindset also helps us to reframe the bigger bet debate that we mentioned at the beginning. The real question isn't AI, good or bad for the environment. It's more like which specific AI applications under which conditions, governed by who, are useful in this context. So, quick example, a question that didn't work for one of my colleagues who works in water management was, how can AI improve water management? Turns out that led to a lot of wasted money and time, which is one of the reasons she was hired in as an AI expert. She shifted the framing, and the question that did help was, we know water is being lost, but customers can't pinpoint where. And physical investigations are expensive, disruptive, and out of scope in terms of cost. Can we find a better way to identify where losses are actually occurring? It's a specific question, it was operationally grounded, and it was answerable. And reframing it that way unlocked a couple of things. First, it forced this company to look at what data they already had. Really many years of meter readings, pressure readings, billing data. And second, it made it clear that if patterns existed in that data, modern AI tools could probably surface them faster and cheaper than sending crews to dig up streets and do some more physical investigation, more invasive investigation. Once they saw that, the insights, kind of were obvious in hindsight. 40% of the treated clean water was never reaching its destination. A lot of it was being lost through old pipes, failing mains, and in some cases, like up in the Boston area where I live, literal wooden pipes that were really old. And the problem wasn't new. I think utilities have told that water is disappearing for years, but what was new is a question specific enough that an AI technology could finally help to answer. Smart meters were generating continuous usage signatures. Patterns are precise enough to identify not just that the water was being lost, but where, in what quantities, and exactly in which buildings, without any excavation, no guesswork, and it really enabled this targeted investigation. So the point of all of that is that the right question didn't just reframe a problem in a more productive way. It revealed that the data to solve it was already there, and it paved the way for a real solution that ended up being quite helpful. That solution happened to be AI. And as it turns out, it's not an isolated example. It's a pattern playing out across the environmental sector. And so I wanted to share some rapid fire examples of things I learned when I was preparing for this talk. Some of this you'll all be quite familiar with, but some of it was really interesting and surprising to learn. So quick survey of some live effective AI applications all running right now successfully across domains that many of you work in every day. So continuing on the water management thread, one medium residential apartment complex used the smart meter information I just mentioned to identify and rectify water inefficiencies that amounted to $40,000 a month in savings. Okay, no big deal, $40,000 a month, great for them, but it compared to some of the billions of dollars figures that we hear about a lot of the time. Yeah. But now imagine these kinds of savings across hundreds and thousands of residential properties, and then tack onto that commercial properties. And then the underlying system in this case, the $40,000 case, it collects 700 million data points a day, which I thought was mind-blowing, from 750,000 sensors across the company. And this is a company that's mostly serving small and mid-sized communities. So if you compile that with other similar systems, and then the systems that are serving major metros, it gets so much incredible and deep and rich water management data that's right for AI solutions of all kinds. Moving out onto the water, today there are computer vision AI systems automatically parsing thousands of aerial survey photos, distinguishing endangered species of floating debris, and it's enabling the collapse of months of manual analysis into a fraction of the time it used to take, which I think is just really shocking. On the coast, we have AI models that are providing decision makers advanced warning of flooding events, not just observations after the fact, but predictions with enough lead time to actually act. In operation, they're digital twins of water treatment facilities and irrigation systems, and they're enabling operators to simulate intervention before committing a single dollar of real resources. And a before and after comparison that I thought was worth highlighting. In 2019, there was a fisheries management project that involved expensive specialist-dependent consulting work. Today, same project is basically handled by cheap sensors and off-the-shelf, so to speak, machine learning. Same problem, fraction of the cost, same solution. And the example that surprised me the most, there are these conservation grant programs that are using AI to dissolve language barriers. And so it allows local leaders to draft proposals in their own languages and still apply for funding that used to be locked behind English-only forms. I think that's pretty cool. So that's a lot. And as you know better than I do, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of what's underway today. It's worth noting, these examples don't all use the same kind of AI. Some use large language models. All of you probably interacted with them through chatbots, ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude or Gemini. Many of them use classical machine learning, which is still a thing, even though it's not making the news much these days. The point being, in these projects, they chose the kind of AI tool that fit the problem, not the one that sounded the most impressive. There are no extra points for using a flashy model if a more rudimentary one solves the problem better. What these examples do share is this pattern I want to highlight. And it's reiterating some themes we've already talked about. Each one started with a specific problem. Each one had adequate data to solve the problem. And then each one had a clear definition of what success looked like. So when it worked, everyone knew it worked. And I think that brings us to one of the questions that really, really matters in practice. How do I make sure that AI work I commission, fund, or oversee starts with a real problem and doesn't become an expensive solution still looking for a problem to solve? It is so common for that to unfold. Okay, another quick question. How many of you in the past year or so have received an AI proposal or a vendor pitch? Show of hands. Okay, how many of you felt fully equipped to evaluate it? Fewer hands. Okay. So if you felt a little lost in those conversations, I can promise you you're not alone. AI jargon. It's really evolving quickly. The technology itself is changing all the time. A lot of the details sound and are super technical. And of course, you'll always work with a technologist to evaluate AI solutions. Some of the most important skills for evaluation are entirely non-technical. You need really solid critical thinking, which is in the wheelhouse of everybody here today in this room. And you need a framework to help think through some potential AI projects, which I'll share with you right now, in the form of 4 questions. The first question, is the problem specific and measurable? The pattern we often see in failing AI initiatives is that we start with this big problem. It leads to these kind of ungrounded AI solutions, and then it becomes impossible to evaluate whether the solution works. Improve our environmental monitoring. That's an aspiration. It's not a problem. Reduce the time to design a hyper-efficient data center cooling system from months to weeks. That's a problem, and actually probably one that AI can help to solve. So one example I gave earlier that comes to us from the New England Aquarium, again, from the Boston area, so apologies for the examples from up there, is almost a textbook illustration of the difference. So what they did not ask was, how can AI help us better monitor and protect endangered species? Again, it sounds reasonable, but it's a tool-first problem. It's a tool-first framing, not a problem-first framing. And it could mean almost anything and probably invite any number of solutions. But instead what they asked was, manually cataloging thousands of aerial survey photos is a bottleneck. We lose months between data collections and conservation action. Can we cut that lag from months down to days? And that set up a specific, measurable, and auditable problem to solve. Turned out that AI happened to be the right tool for that job. And they could evaluate whether the AI worked because they defined what it meant to work. So if you can't state your problem in 1 to 2 clear sentences, you're probably not ready to commission AI yet. Question 2, does the data already exist? Or is the data collection a project in and of itself? This is probably one of the number 1 areas where AI projects stall. This gap between proposal and delivery often lies here in the data, not the technology. Something worth noting, every industry that I normally work with complains about not having enough data. That's always the complaint. In the environmental sector, not always, but pretty often, you have the opposite problem. Decades of really, really rich deep and clean data about water qualities, species counts, about ocean surveys, about air monitoring, fisheries records. They're accumulated over decades, and that data has just kept growing as compute becomes cheaper and storage becomes first. The bottleneck isn't the collections, oftentimes, in this sector. It's actually knowing what to do with what you have. The tools for acting on existing data have really improved in the past few years. I mean, in ways that are quite revolutionary. There have been major leaps in signal processing in the past 5 years. Classical machine learning, which is that kind of that kind of AI that spot patterns and trends in large structured data sets. It's really mature, it's pretty cheap, and it's reliable. That's exactly the kind of data this sector has been collecting for years, and it's not very glamorous. It's not what's in the news these days, but it's proven. And many cases, like the fisheries example I mentioned earlier, turns out to be that what was once an expensive consulting project is really cheap sensor plus software projects. When patterns are more complex or the data is messy and unstructured, like audio or images or text, there are newer methods that can be really effective. And then when experiments or simulations go slow or expensive, that you can't run many of them, and that's the case for many industrial engineering projects, engineers can use what are called surrogate models and other kinds of emerging techniques. And these are models that are trained to approximate those types of simulations quickly and cheaply. And then engineers can explore many more design options than they could ever afford to test directly. And this applies to domains spanning things like plasma physics for nuclear energy, fluid dynamics, and even multi-physics systems. So for all of these, through line is, the tools have gotten better, they've gotten cheaper, and so if you have a well-scoped problem and you can feed the beast with the data it needs to solve the problem, you actually might be in a decent position to commission AI. Now, when the data doesn't exist, and this happens, it's a different kind of project with different timelines and risks, and you may have a problem that's worthy of doing the legwork for that. There often are. Data generation tools are increasingly capable. That's one of the options, but synthetic data carries its own version of the agreement trap that you mentioned earlier. It can reflect the assumptions of whoever built it. So it means things like data generation is not a shortcut around this second question. It does require its own valuation. Okay, question 3. Who owns the model and what are the error modes? So every model is wrong sometimes. That's a fact. It's a property of the technology. The question isn't, could it be wrong? Because the answer is yes. It's how does it fail? Does it fail in obvious ways that you can observe and then presumably correct and address? Does it fail quietly in ways that you may not be able to detect? And what might the consequences of that be? In some ways, this loops back again to the agreement trap. A model that consistently returns confident, plausible answers may be giving you the answers you want, but it's not necessarily trustworthy. It may just be telling you what you want. In environmental context, I think these minor failures, even minor failures, can have really serious consequences. Misidentified species might mean misallocated conservation resources. Missed flooding signals might impact real communities. Wrong irrigation models might mean wasted water or failing crops. So real consequences even for something that seemed kind of like a minor error. So 3 simple stress test questions you can ask are, in this application, what kinds of mistakes might hurt people or ecosystems? How will we notice when the model makes those mistakes? Are there alarms, are there audits or human checks that are in place? And then given those answers, is this level of risk available for how we plan to use the model? If you can't answer those questions, the model is probably not ready to deploy at scale. And one additional, I think, really important question is, who's accountable when it goes wrong? Is it a vendor? Is it your organization? Is it the model's developers? Today, there aren't really very clear laws on this or norms around this. So I think if you're ever thinking about commissioning an AI project and that answer isn't clear, that's definitely something you'll want to clarify before moving forward. All right, and the 4th question, is the cost proportionate to the expected benefit? There's such a thing as the clean AI principle, and it has 2 parts. The process of building AI should be clean. It's the first part, meaning it's built on reliable data with honest assumptions and without cutting corners that introduce things like bias at the foundation. And then the application should be worth the cost. That's the second part of it, meaning the problem you're solving should justify the compute, the energy, and the water that running these systems actually consumes. So again, back to New England again, apologies. New England Aquarium's Valve State Lab, I think, offers this really lovely working model of this principle in practice. It requires startups to account for their AI's energy footprint before entering into any partnerships. And it follows frameworks like the Google 4Ms for Sustainable AI, which is this framework for accounting for energy costs at every step of AI development. And what I love about this is that the question of proportionality is baked in from the beginning. It's not bolted at the end or out of the fact once you've already decided you're going to do something. And I think that seen through this lens, 2 points connect back to some of our earlier examples. First, not every problem needs a large language model, the fancy AI that we see a lot in the news these days. In the fisheries case, for example, the winning tool wasn't the most advanced one. It was really, really basic classical machine learning systems that met the need that they had, fraction of the cost and a fraction of the energies. Second, back to the theme that I think is on a lot of your minds, data center alley. The footprint of these facilities is really significant. Water, energy, land. At the same time, some of the AI tools powered by these data centers are now being used to figure out more efficient and cleaner solutions to things like cooling system and other sort of systems. It doesn't erase or solve the debate, but it's a hint that this clean AI principle is a design choice that can be proactively used, not just a slogan that's used after the fact or conveniently referred to. So 4 questions. And now a quick digression, but I think a really important one. I think what I've just described might make it seem like there's this assumption that isn't actually always true in practice, which is that you actually have the runway or time to ask these questions before you've already committed to something. I know that's not always the reality. A lot of boards have AI strategies in the annual plans. Whether or not anybody knows what AI strategy means, funders ask about AI applications in grant proposals. There are colleagues who have already kind of announced AI pilots and are already running. So this ambient pressure of not wanting to be the organization that's left behind is very real, and it's not going to go away. But this framework is a tool for navigating that pressure productively. So if you can't yet answer those 4 questions, it's not a reason to feel left behind. It really isn't. It's a legitimate basis for redirecting. So maybe you want to redirect toward a more specific problem definition or a tighter pilot scope or a more honest vendor conversation. And now you have some more language for that. A useful distinction under pressure that I think is worth keeping in mind is piloting versus deploying an AI solution. You don't need to have the answer to all 4 questions to start learning. Piloting with clear learning objectives is a defensible response to this organizational pressure to start using AI. And deploying at scale without answered questions in a domain where its states are ecological and not just financial. I think that's where the real risk is. So the bottom line is that we're not ready yet is actually not a bad place to be, as long as you can say why, and as long as you can kind of rescope to something that makes more sense to where you are, what you are ready to do. So that all brings us back to where we started, and the question this whole talk was kind of centered around, which is, can AI save the planet? Still the wrong question. Better version is, are we asking AI to do something specific with data we actually have, governed by someone who is accountable at a cost we can justify? That's the question this route can answer. Success in the field is about knowing which question to ask and then bringing the tool that can help us find the answer. For many of the examples we covered today, the underlying problem to be solved hadn't changed. What changed was someone asking a specific enough question, and the tools to answer it were finally within reach. There have been a lot of technological advance in the past 10 years or so. And that tool happened to be some version of AI. So returning to this data center tension, I won't pretend that anything I've shared today magically resolved it. It's a really complex problem with a lot of perspectives. But the way through it isn't winning the AI good or bad debate. That debate will never have a clear winner or clear loser. It'll just go on and on. It's about building a capacity in firms like this one to demand better questions, tighter scoping, and real accountability. And what I hope you actually leave with, the environmental sector has done decades of really patient and unglamorous work, collecting data, building expertise, and developing a deep knowledge of how complex systems respond when you push on them. All of that matters a lot, and it's exactly what makes you really powerful stewards of how AI gets built and used. But AI is not a sage, it's not an oracle, even though it'll try to convince you that it is. Used without discipline, it's really a very convincing mirror for your own assumptions. And in this domain, that's a very risky prospect. But when used well, AI doesn't replace your judgment, it amplifies your reach. And in this case, at a scale that's finally going to match the complexity of the problems that this field is up against. Thank you. And with that, we're going to turn over to have some questions. The way we're going to do questions is Kim has this catch box in his phone, so it's not hard. And I'm really grateful that she's going to be the one tossing it around to those of you who have a question, because I played soccer and I can't do anything with my arms. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Kid will toss you the catch box, and because it's a live moving projectile, I ask that everyone keep their head on a swivel so that you don't actually get bumped on the back of your head or something. All right. Any questions?
So I need your help. I need your help. So I'm not, if somebody's over there, and you guys are going to have to pass it along. Okay?
Teamless.
There need a few 3 balls.
For sure.
You
So, oh my God, later. It's there. I'll get for you guys can figure out. That is great. Just 50 things. I'm going to stand up now.
Say, well, I very much appreciate your presentation. As an old philosophy major, it seems to me you're basically saying remove the normative judgments from these questions because you're asking for wisdom that it doesn't have. Specifically, since you're from Boston, I've worked on an issue that's similar to Boston. These older gas systems leak a lot of methane. Now, I know there's an MIT scientist, I can't think of his name, who's been doing some testing up there. The idea is to try and make a judgment to economically determine where you can phase out the gas and re-electrify areas, do it in an economically sound way. It seems to me like I'm going to connect you with him, so you might be able to help him. We're doing the same thing in Richmond, Virginia. And obviously there's tremendous resistance from the gas industry because they want to use more gas and they look at it as a source of money, even the city that funds it. But it seems to me this is the kind of tool that can help us to best determine how to electrify the system economically. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, AI-driven tools can probably help with a lot of phases of that. The analysis, I can imagine AI being used to maybe simulate some different scenarios for how things are phased out, see what the impacts are economically, environmentally, the impact of construction on people's day-to-day experience, to the extent that's going to be a relevant part of it. So I do think that, again, when we think about applying AI to projects like this one that are really complex problems, I think it's really important to lead with that. Do we really understand all the different problems we're trying to solve? How can we scope it in such a way that we can find measurable answers each step along the way? And is it the case that AI might be able to help with some, all, or for parts of this?
Pressure.
Any other questions?
Okay, look.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Value. Yeah, so I think a part of the challenge in addressing all of this is that a lot of people in the room hopefully don't understand much the opportunities that it offers this data-driven analysis of a lot of our work, while also recognizing that these tools also are being made available quickly. And a lot of times, those impacts are being connected with the fact that most of the population is using it for very entertainment-oriented purposes. Yes. And so a lot of times, Miracle, we're looking at the impacts of AI. I'm not just talking about the impacts that we're seeing from the work that we're doing in terms of save the environment. We're looking at the impacts and how that balances out with what the rest of the world is also utilizing that for, and the impacts that having so much of the world's internet, which is largely becoming an AI machine, coming to Kenya. And so how do you balance out those benefits and weights whenever we're talking about a relatively small percentage of the populations doing it for things that hopefully help the environment, whenever you're comparing that to 99% of the population of the world that's using it for purposes for Facebook videos?
So I think that's such a great question. I wish I had the answer for that, but I really don't. These are my personal perspective is that a lot of the tech advances that we've seen in the past, let's call it 15, 20 years, they've just happened so fast and they're just very, very motivated economically. I mean, there's just, and not economic wins for everybody. It's a subset of people, right, that are enjoying some of the economic wins. I think there's enough disagreement these days between different groups that it's a good time to interrogate what we think is important to us as a society. and start to make sure that we use a lot, at least in the U.S., we have the luxury of democratic processes that can help us maybe realign on what is important to us as societies and make sure that that translates to incentives that are written in laws or regulations that maybe recalibrate some of what you're talking about. I don't think that fix is coming quickly. I really don't, unfortunately. But I do think it can happen. And I think it has to happen through hard conversations that get away from my side versus your side and more like, hey, what do we have in common? What are we trying to build? What can we collaborate on together? In some cases, that might require really complex, for example, economic analyses or other types of analyses that Anna can help with, for example. But I think the problem you're talking about is human at the core and trying to realign what it is that we believe in and what we value, and trying to make sure that those incentives get built into policy. But that work it's hard work because it can be emotional. It can be really divisive if we don't come to it with that kind of purpose of coming together and convergence in line. So I'm sorry I don't have a better kind of solution for you. But from my perspective, that's kind of how I see the challenge that you raised.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Alejandra